All right, how's everybody doing today? Well, all right, excellent. Well, I think we're really happy and excited to be here to present this. We need to switch the display, right?
Just hit the escape key and minimize me and maximize you.
All right. Here we go. So we are just going to be, actually, we can do this full screen, right? We had plans for a fancy PowerPoint, etc., but export, import didn't work so well, so we're just doing PDF slides. Today we're talking about the process of building Joomla websites. I think it's something that hasn't really been addressed a lot. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Dennis?
No.
You know, and both of us have had a lot of experience building websites, not just in Joomla, but in general. You know, I've been doing it since '96 or so, and you've been doing it for years and years. And we thought it would be helpful to share some of the knowledge we had gained in how all of this works and how things best fit together. Danny, thanks so much for your very nice introduction for me. You know, as he mentioned, I'm kind of Mr. Mom right now, so I'm mostly occupied with dealing with diapers and bottles and things like that, although I am keeping my hand in with a small book of Joomla clients. And Dennis, is there anything else you wanted to add for your bio?
No, just that I spent my last week, my last 6 months preparing for, and the last weekend getting married. So
that's right, a couple days ago. So congratulations. And then we've got our contact information here, phone numbers and email addresses. So if you have any questions, you know, shoot me a message or give me a call. Same with Dennis, I believe.
Absolutely.
We should be good to go. So let's talk about, you know, why websites are kind of a pain in the ass. They're really tough to do, and we've put together some ideas for the reasons why they are tough to do. Top in my book is that it is a multidisciplinary process in order to do it well, especially with a content management system related site. I mean, you have a lot of things going on both the technical end of things, but then you also have a whole lot of things going on the creative end of things. You could have a rock solid, technically awesome Joomla website, but it might look like crap, and it might not display the branding as the client wants it to, or communicate the messaging, or generate the marketing outcomes that you want from it. Another reason why web projects are challenging is that clients, you know, they don't really know or understand a lot of everything from how the project should work to how the technology works to, in the course of small to medium-sized businesses, even what will work or what their options might be to create a web project. And so a lot of times you have to lead them along or take the time to explain things to them that you know, may seem very obvious to us, but you know, they really need to have their hands held. CMS projects are especially prone to scope creep. And that basically means when the client or your boss or whoever says, well, how hard could it be to add another button that leads to our e-commerce gateway and that lets people buy, you know, 1,000 items from this catalog? Here you go. I mean, you've already got the rest of the site built. Why can't you just put this in there?
And another thing, they become educated about all the goodies that are out there. I mean, they come to the extensions website and they say, I found this great extension. Looks really easy. Can we install it? Yeah,
all you got to do is click on Template Manager and one-click install, right? And then it's ready to go on my site. Well, there's a whole lot of other work involved in making these things work successfully, as you know, lots of folks here know, and anyone knows who's done this sort of thing. And you know, it really can get out of control. And if you're working with a flat rate project, which is what we're going to be talking about today for the most part, it can just blow your budget and be a major problem. The other thing that I found challenging is that a project deliverable may be new to the vendor. I've worked mostly with small to medium-sized clients, and I've been in a variety of situations where I have to try out a brand new extension that I've never used before for Joomla in order to give them the result that they want to see. So it's new to me, and it's something that I have to learn anew as well. And then, you know, there's a lot of benefits that you get out of Joomla, or actually managing this process. And Dennis, why don't you speak to some of these points?
We're going to try to pass them on periodically, so
yes.
hopefully we won't trip each other up.
Yes.
As far as the project management aspects of any project, you know, you put a project in place to control the scope, cost, and schedule at a given quality level. So that's not different than what we're doing here. It's sometimes even more important because it does organize the work. The work is easily, you know, added to if you look out for scope creep. If you don't look out for scope creep, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So the project plan, a discipline, it ensures consistency, it enables you to do it better the next time, and it manages the client expectations. We found that if the client knows what's coming, when it's coming, they're in constant communications throughout that entire process, just makes everybody more satisfied with the end deliverable. So when Justin and I were putting together these slides, he talked about a process, I talked about a methodology, and so I went to the know-all to end-all dictionaries, Wikipedia, to find out what the difference was. And it said, and I agree with this, the methodology is, I think, of a toolbox. So you have all these tools that you can pull out and use on your project. If you have a definable, repeatable customer, and it's the same customer all the time, a cookie-cutter approach, it's more the definition of a process. Where you want to get to a process, we want to have definable, repeatable, exactly the same set of requirements. But hey, you know what? It's different. Different projects will have different approaches and permutations.
Yeah, and also the size and nature of the market that you're building into for the Joomla project will really change your approach. The enterprise market is extremely different than the small to medium-sized market for how you would implement a Joomla website. Mostly because of the budgets. There's at an enterprise level, you have money for analysis and feedback and measuring metrics and things like that. A lot of times with the small to medium-sized businesses or projects, you just gotta go for the lowest hanging fruit and tell the client, unless you've got thousands of more dollars to spend on a search engine optimization campaign, that's not something that we can do for you. So a lot of times you do what's most obvious and what is easiest to do and makes the most sense and based on your experience. Of course, there's also vertical markets and internal clients as well. So a vertical market would be someone who's building websites for doctors' offices, and then they've got a very specific process and they can just crank things out. I'm trying to specialize in websites for tattoo studios and developing a vertical market solution that basically uses a template that I can crank out these websites really quick. And then even if it's an internal client, even if you're building a Joomla website for your boss, you still want to be able to report back to your boss and say, all right, it's going to cost this much, it's going to take this long, here's how we're doing, here's the process, etc. So all of these, Dennis and I are mostly going to be focusing on the differences between the enterprise process/methodology and the process methodology for small to medium-sized organizations, but a lot of those will apply to vertical markets and internal clients as well. Dennis is going to be speaking mostly to the enterprise level of things, and then I'll be talking about a lot of the small and medium-sized market characteristics. So first of all, let's talk about the difference between the enterprise and small and medium.
So in the enterprise, and you'll see another column here in a second that talks to the small and medium, in the enterprise, you usually have multiple project managers. You might have one for the client, you might have two for the client for the duration of the project. You might have a project manager for the design company. You might have another one if you have another person involved for development. So you have multiple project managers, and usually 3+ developers, a handful perhaps photographers, copywriters. So there's an entire crew of people, and vendors also get involved as those specialty skills are needed. They're called upon. There's, in a large project, a formal set of specifications, a formal requirements document, a formal project plan. When I say formal, I mean that it's signed off. It's a deliverable. Everybody shakes their head and agrees to the project plan with their name on it. Each task, they raise their hand, yes, I'm responsible for that task. Some of them are customer related, some of them are non-customer related. And in the larger engagement, the customer is willing to spend for exactly what he wants. He knows what he wants, he knows when he's going to get it, and he's willing to spend, bigger bucks for it.
In contrast, we've got a different situation for the small and medium-sized markets. The person who's providing the Joomla service is often, one or two people. When I work with Joomla sites, I do it all: graphic design, Joomla implementation, technology, etc. It's just me, and I am better at some things than I am at others, and can fudge what I'm not too good at. But the customer is happy. Customer wants one-stop shopping for a discrete solution. A small business, they want to write one check to one business or one provider. They don't want to have to juggle a bunch of different vendors and have to keep track of all of that a lot of times. And the customer is willing to compromise requirements for value. They don't have the budget to get the fanciest solution, including what they might want and what they might have in their mind's eyes, what they think they're going to get for a certain amount of money. So you've got to pull them back and say, you don't have the budget for this. No one's going to be able to do this for you. So let's do some things that make sense for your business that are within your budget.
I was at a party. Let me get in.
Sure. We'll do the switcheroo.
And I was talking to a friend of mine. He says, "So how's this website thing going?" I said, "It's great. I love it." He said, "So how much does it cost?" So I said, "Well, anywhere from 20 to I even worked on a couple of were like $80,000, $100,000." And there was silence in the room. And he said, "Well, I thought you just put it up." I said, "Well, this is your calling card on the internet. This represents your brand, your company, what you're selling. So it's your everyday advertisement. And so you want to put in, what brings your brand, your advertising, your uniqueness to the market in the best way that you can. And sometimes that costs, more than you would expect." There's many resources that are involved. You're talking about developers, specialists, photographers, designers, front-end developers, back-end developers. It's like producing a movie sometimes. It's just,
And a lot of times those will be coming from the client, too.
Some of them are the client, and some, they have their skills, the larger ones, absolutely. The duration of a typical large, when I say large, project, roughly 6 to 12 months. That's basically what I've seen. And the decision points, they're usually made by an executive with input from a committee. When I talk about committee, I mean there's usually marketing is involved, but there's more than one person. And I'll get into multiple Joomla environments, but there are multiple environments. There's a development environment, and then there's a training environment, there's a pre-production and production environment.
So looking at the small to medium-sized market, pretty much I put about $2,000 as the bottom I'm willing to charge for a Joomla website. And, you can go lower than that. But that's really where, even for the simplest Joomla site, it's not going to be worth your while if you go lower than that. Your mileage may vary. There are a few exceptions to everything, of course. And then I'd say, the budgets can go up into the low 5 figures, maybe $20,000, $30,000 or something like that, depending on the organization and the resources that they're bringing to the table. I've worked with some not-for-profits which had significant chunks of grant money to put into a website, but they were still kind of coming at it from the smaller perspective. Another thing that the small and medium-sized client, they'll have relatively few resources compared to the enterprise client. They probably don't have creative folks and certainly probably don't have technical folks lined up. Especially in small business clients, it's rare to find someone where they've dedicated someone to just do marketing or where it's even officially part of their job. It's almost always someone's extra task that they need to accomplish. So they're going to be looking to the provider to deliver those services as well. Project duration, 1 to 3 months. Smaller websites, you can knock them out pretty quick, especially if you're following a process and if you have an engaged client. Of course, I've been in the nightmare situations where you're waiting on content and waiting and it stretches, but you can knock it out a lot faster. Final decisions are made by a single person. Typically, usually it's the business owner or department head or someone who's got the authority just to make the decisions and get them out the door. And then it uses a single Joomla environment. So the development environment basically becomes the production environment. What you develop in, you just flip the switch and that's your live site. Just because there isn't really a budget to manage a full development environment, nor would a small to medium-sized client know what the heck to do with it. So, all right, let's move on. Okay, so this is my kind of project overview for small to medium markets, kind of a rough flow chart. And then Dennis is also going to be giving a more complex version with a bunch of other options for enterprise projects. But this is roughly the process that I follow for just about all of my websites. Business development, the milestone you get out of that is a signed contract. Go into the planning mode, and we'll be talking about these phases in more detail as we move forward. The outcome for me is what I call a finalized approved taxonomy document, and I'll be explaining what that is. But that's basically like the project plan for one of these small sites. Then we move to the graphic design and visual design. The outcome from that is a final approved visual design. Infrastructure and features are kind of implemented in the production/development environment. Content's added in, and then testing, quality assurance, et cetera, happens. Site launch is the next big milestone in my process. And then we move to follow-up and support, which could include things like training. It could include additional ongoing services. Sometimes I've got clients who, like I said, they don't have a marketing person. So they're like, well, Justin, can you be my marketing person and take care of these write-ups and whatnot? Absolutely. I've got my that's a great source of revenue. So that's roughly how I approach almost all of my projects. Now let's talk about the complicated stuff.
And I didn't want to shock you all at once when you see the other slide. I think you might be shocked of all the stuff that comes underneath here. But the main block is that you start off with your project planning. You bring together a team of clients and customers, and it finishes in a meeting where everybody says, "Yep, this is what I want out of a new website." I call it your project strategy meeting. It may be it is a physical meeting. Other events after that may just be telephone calls. It may be the first time that you meet everybody that's involved in a project, but it's important to know who those people are because probably the rest of the project, you'll only hear their voice. Information architecture is second phase. This is where your design comps are done, where your content is talked about, not finalized. That culminates in a set of requirements from your design and from the previous two steps. This is where you get a formal requirements document, formal being that it is signed off and it is approved by all the participants, and it's in the project plan, and it is the input into the actual execution and the rest of the project, where you have two phases that iterate back and forth. Interesting. There used to be an arrow between those. I guess that caught up.
Maybe that's
PDF conversion.
Yeah.
But the prototype and finalize. You put up your content. The content probably will be reviewed and changed several times by several different subject matter experts, and that goes with a lot of it. So those two are iterative boxes. At some point in time, everybody is comfortable with what they have out there, and you're ready for the launch. The launch is where you do a final quality assessment. The customer does an acceptance test, and then things go live. And likewise, there's the opportunity to optimize your website for search and other marketing aspects of your website, and follow-on maintenance, whether it's warranty, another phase, or the next project. Not to scare you, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and I'll be going through some of that.
It's what that big enterprise budget pays for. Right?
And there's a lot of people involved in it. I just wanted to point out one more thing while I'm on here, is that search and social are becoming more and more important, so it is sprinkled throughout, although a lot of it is done in the optimization phases for the projects I've worked in.
All right, well, let's start talking about the beginning of a project and business development, or getting the client, setting up your deal and selling them on it. As we mentioned before, for the small and medium-sized marketplace, the customer wants a one-stop shopping for like a total solution. This is my website. Here it is. It's ready to go. It's all there. For small to medium-sized markets, my experience has been that the client is not familiar with Joomla. In other words, when I go in and I start talking to a client about a small, medium-sized client about a website, I don't even bring up Joomla typically. I say, it's a dynamic website. It's a website you can edit yourself. It's a website that can do all of these things. But Joomla really comes in as an afterthought. That is starting to change, however, and in the past year or so, I've seen more and more of these small business clients who are like, hey, I heard about Joomla, or I've already got a Joomla website, or hey, my incompetent developer employee has kind of started to build a Joomla website and I kind of like it, but we need you to come in and finish it off, etc. And so the name recognition is starting to hit. Joomla's market share really is starting to make a difference. The small and medium-sized client will likely require additional services. We mentioned that. Creative, design, technology, even sometimes just getting them to think about what they should, how they should market their business, because a lot of times they don't have any marketing savvy either. These projects may require a client-specific costing approach. So sometimes a small business client just won't have the couple to several $1,000s to get the basic Joomla website out the door. So I say, well, okay, let's do this in a phased approach. Let's build a basic flat website, that's got a couple of web pages that will get your message out there, get your placard out on the internet, but we'll build the design for that website so that it can be easily translated into a Joomla template. And then, down the road next year when they've got more budget for it, they can then take it to the next phase. So I've used that pretty effectively a couple of times to help clients really break their website marketing into parts to make it affordable for them. And then, my target time that I say in terms of writing up my proposal, which is basically 2 pages of boilerplate legalese and then a work statement, I figure it takes about 3 to 4 hours. Now, YMMV, your mileage may vary. All of the hour estimates that I'm putting in here are my estimates and my time that I spend on it. I've been doing this for a while. I'm pretty efficient. The main thing is when you start to do this work, you want to start noting how long it takes you to do certain things so that you can then both try to get more efficient at them, but then you can also start figuring out, okay, how much does this cost? I like to use a person hours metric because everyone's internal rate is going to be different for these sorts of things. So I try to task it to person hours. And also, these are pretty aggressive. These are my cut to the bare bone hours, and like I said, I've been doing it for a while, so I can crank it out pretty quickly. It could easily take longer than that, or it could easily take longer for a more complicated proposal. In the proposal that goes out to the customer, I've got my boilerplate legalese that I mentioned, but then the statement of work needs to contain very, very specific deliverables. So a list of, I as vendor will give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each of those specific things has, if you're going to do web page production, how many web pages are you going to do? How many images are you going to produce for this thing? How many, how broad in scope will the website be? How big of a Joomla structure will you have to build? It really pays to put these specific deliverables in the contract, because then when scope creep comes in, you can go back to your client and say, hey, I'd love to do that for you, no problem, but it goes outside what you agreed to, so we're just going to have to charge a little more, and that's more money, more revenue for you. If you manage the client expectations right, they're happy to pay it. And then also the contract needs to include the client's responsibilities. If they're bringing the web hosting environment, if they're registering the domain name, if they are responsible for approving your access to certain systems or whatever, that all needs to be included in the contract as well. Discovery is the process of, prior to getting the contract signed, you got to go into the client, you got to figure out what they want to do, how much work you're going to have to do, and usually with a small to medium-sized client, you got to kind of go in there and talk to them and figure it out on your own. You can't really charge for it. A lot of times with larger projects, and maybe Dennis, you can speak to this, the client doesn't know what's going on. They got a giant mess of code. There's stuff all over the place, and you almost come in and you charge and say, all right, I'm going to come and help you figure out what you have, and then we can do the project itself. I've had 1 or 2 gigs like that, and you probably have had big messes where you go in and have to charge them to just figure out what to do, right?
And some yeah, I mean, it's where you're defining your requirements. They have an idea of what they want,
but they don't know what they have, and they don't know where it is.
They get everybody involved. They say, well, that's not really what I want. I want this.
Okay.
So in the enterprise, usually we get called in response to something. Someone puts out an RFP, or someone says, I have a document that our internal folks say this is everything they want on the website. And so that is a lot of that work that Justin just talked about is already done for us. So it comes to us, and then we turn that around into a form of a proposal back to them. Okay, it's going to cost this much. These are the things that I'm worried about. These are the things that I need more clarity on, and I can't really cost. So usually I would say about 80% of that stuff that's in the RFP is costable. I understand it, and I can cost it up to 20% roughly. It's just a little bit nebulous, and I need to have more discovery. And so there'll be pieces of the proposal that talk about that, what I know for sure and what I don't know quite yet. So the first meeting after the contract award is where some of those little pieces that aren't quite clear in the contract are discussed, and I'll get more into that as we go forward.
So the next general overarching phase we wanted to talk about was sort of the planning and structure for the website. So this is after the deal has been signed and you're working with the client to kind of figure out, okay, exactly what are we going to do. Now I've kind of developed a process that's worked pretty well for me as I've worked with these small and medium-sized clients. And initially I will sit down with them and we'll have a pretty good idea of what they want to do based on the discovery that we did in the sales process. But then we'll sit down and I'll typically say, well, why don't you write an outline of what you want your site to be? Just give me a rough outline, send it over to me, and then I can start working from there. I can also talk to them about what they have already existing, an existing website, any content that they have queued up, any design assets, things like that, which I might need for the project. I'll tell them to start sending that stuff over. And then I will build or create what is I call a website taxonomy, which is basically lists and outlines in a plain text document of what their website is going to have and what it's going to do. And the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that. That taxonomy goes through a review, revision, and approval process with the client. And then the milestone is I tell the client, you guys sign off on this final taxonomy document. At this point, we can start building out the other phases of your website. But once you guys sign off on this taxonomy document, it's set in stone. Any changes that you want to make will incur a cost overage. And so let's go to the next slide, if you would, Dennis. What is a taxonomy? I approach it by just making a basic text document with two parts. The first part of the taxonomy is a list of elements common to all or most pages on the site. So at the beginning of the taxonomy document, I say, okay, here are going to be the things that are going to be present on every page of the site. Well, we've got the packaging design, and we're going to have your branding or your logo, and we're going to have a main menu, and that main menu is going to have these items. And we're going to have a sidebar element which allows for sign up to an email newsletter, and there's going to be a footer. And usually this initial list of elements ends up being about a page or two, and it's just a simple list, and that provides some structure as to what all the content is going to be on the website, because that's where you put the menus and what the menu items are going to be. Then I do an outline of all of the site pages and features, and it's just a big list of site pages saying the home page will contain elements common to all pages, as well as this unique element and that unique element. Then I go to the About Us page, will contain all of the elements common to all pages, and then it will contain a text write-up about us, and then there will be a feature photo of what goes on this page. And I do that for every page of the website with the exception of things like, say there's a press releases area, I'll just generally describe all of the content that will go in there. But I really do try to make a very specific list that the client has to review and sign off on before moving forward. This becomes an incredibly valuable document for controlling scope as well, because then they will understand what's going on. And also, I like to use this text-only document because in the case of small to medium-sized clients, you don't want to mix them up with a bunch of graphical messaging. You want to get them back to the core of what they need their website to do and how they need it to be structured. And by just making it text and just making it these lists and forcing them to think through this process, they end up with a much better site structure, and it includes everything that they want, and I found it's much easier to manage that way. Now, my time for generating a taxonomy is about 3 to 5 hours of time. That's based on a pattern I've set up before, and again, if it's a bigger site, it's going to take more time.
Similar to the taxonomy document is the requirements document. It's exactly what Justin said. It has, bullet points, paragraph words. Only there's more. That's basically what the difference is. There's more pages. There's more things to say. And it's a formal document signed off. And in addition, I don't think you generate a project plan.
I do not generate a project plan. I tell the client, and the client does. You give a small business a project plan, it's going to go straight to File 13.
Whereas the larger businesses, they require it. Most of the RFPs say that there will be a project plan. And so because there's so much interaction between all of the groups, sometimes the larger clients, like Justin said, they have those skills on site for design, for implementation. So you have to see who's going to do what. And content is a major piece of that. A lot of times there's pieces within the organization where the subject matter experts, they know their little piece of the world. They're the only place that the corporation can go to for authoring the content that they want to see on that website, because they know their customers best, they know their business best. So all those things are approved in the project plan. I'm going to go through some of this pretty quick. Yes, pretty quick. So the first two boxes there, the planning, we have the initial kickoff event, which I mentioned is a project strategy workshop. First time all people get to see each other. High-level project plan is created. Customer says, I want it by X date. They say, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that. It's the high-level project plan. It's not cast in stone at this point. As far as what else do I want to mention here? The policies and procedures. If I give you a document, who in your corporation is going to have the authority to sign off on it? Do I need to give it to someone else to review it before? So just all those types of things are worked out at the strategy meeting. That's the essence of the phase one. We talk about the marketing, we talk about the content, who's going to be doing the content. I put a lot of this in here so you can see it after this meeting. I'm not going to talk to it all, so it's more reference material. The creative concept strategy, who's going to how's that going to be performed? Who's going to approve it? Where you're going to host inside, or you're going to do a third-party hosting? They usually have a current website, and they're just upgrading it. So you go in with what you know of their current website as far as their marketing and keywords, and you talk a little bit about what they feel those are bringing in as far as value to their company.
Let's talk about the design and prototyping phase, which Dennis and I approach in a couple different ways. For the small and medium-sized market, the way that I approach it, before any graphic design takes place, three things need to be finalized. The final approved taxonomy, which we've discussed, customer branding, and I require a finalized customer brand, a finished logo, ideally delivered as a vector image file to me. Ideally, they have a branding document, which also says, our online font styles are as follows, and things like that. But again, if it's a smaller business, you're probably just have a logo. If they don't have a logo, I stop the presses right there, and I say I'm not going to design your website until you get your branding figured out. And if you want to hire someone to help you do that, here I am. That's another revenue source. That's another deliverable that I can provide. And then the publishing requirements. Does this website have to work in Internet Explorer 6? Oh, and usage share has dropped below 1% in the United States for i6. So the final nails are being driven into the coffin. But things like, does this have to work well on the iPad? Does there have to be a mobile-specific version of it? I have my own lowest common denominator online publishing standards, targeted 960 pixel width dimensions, things like that. But the client may have some special needs. I'll usually sit down and have a design consultation with the client, and a lot of times they aren't, this may be a completely new website for them, or they have a really crappy website that they want to ditch entirely. And we got to start from the beginning with design. And a lot of times I will sit down and talk about some very basic stuff, like, a lot of ways that you can think about on-screen design is it is either predominantly a dark background with lighter colored foreground elements, which gives you a particular type of feel for the website, or it's vice versa. It's a light background with darker colored foreground elements. And obviously there are different directions, but the darker background's a little more risky, a little more rock and roll, things like that. Lighter colored background's a little more clinical, a little more formal. And I talk to them about these ideas. What is their business about? Who is their business reaching out to? What is the visual messaging need to convey, and who does that need to reach? Also tied in with that, a real easy way to find out what the client likes is, well, give me a list of 10 websites that you like and you'd like to emulate. And that's a real good way to get ideas and pull information out. Another thing that I do with clients is or for Joomla sites especially, is I do what I call outside-in art direction, or I call this phase the packaging design for the website. So I make it clear, we're worrying about the headers and the footers and the background images and how all the content will be packaged, but because it is a dynamic website, content can be made to appear in a number of different ways. I tell this to the client so they're not expecting things like, well, the line breaks on the body copy on your comp, don't match the Joomla site. And of course, if you're an internet professional, that's the case, but sometimes they don't. As well as it gives you a lot of flexibility to, if the client doesn't like how a particular module looks, you can just say, oh, yeah, we'll tweak it, or we're working on it, but, follows the same general design standards. I'd usually generate, between 1 and 3 initial visual conceptions, and I just use Photoshop, Illustrator, Adobe Fireworks is probably the best piece of software for generating these comps in my experience, because it has the ideal blend of support for bitmap and vector graphics. And I show the client flat graphics. I say, here's a picture of what your homepage could look like. Here's a picture of what an inside page could look like. How does it look? And I have them go through a review, revision, and approval process until we get these finalized flat graphical designs, not interactive web pages at all, flat graphics that they provide final approval for. Again, you want to change something after the fact, it's going to cost you more money, but properly managed, they'll know about that. I never show a small and medium-sized client wireframes, because what happens if you show a small to medium-sized client wireframes is they'll start passing it around and they'll say, well, this looks good, but yeah, our website's it's a white background with these black rectangles on it, and our logo isn't there. And they don't understand what wireframes are. They're not graphical professionals or marketing professionals. Just show them the final design. What's next? Okay, so my number. I consider myself a pretty decent art director, and I can control the client, and I think I can come up with completely custom designs in 12 hours of my work time. That's given all the other things that are done. Could be a lot more, but that's what I use for estimating projects. All right, let's talk about the enterprise.
The enterprise, similarly, it's not 1 to 3, it's usually 2 to 3. Sometimes there'll be a fourth one thrown in. They're formally presented to a bunch of people, marketing, the executives, the owners of the company, the decision makers. And they talk amongst themselves, and they say, usually, well, I like that one, but I like that one too. Can you put them together? So there's some give and take. Finally, a creative design is selected. And the keywords, the keyword discussion also starts at this point in the process. So we talked about the design comps. Wireframes, not always. It depends on the complexity of the subject matter, whether they have a current or it's a brand new site, how many pages they have. So, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Design requirements, again, the comps I talked about, they are formally approved, and they go into the next step of the process. Style guide for the developers, similar stuff. Style guide's a style guide. Content owners, sometimes the content owners need a style guide where they'll be given access to actually create some of the content. They need to know how we talk about our brand, some of the words, the buzzwords, and the incorporation of how we want to sell ourselves. Those conventions for the content owners, there's a guide for them in some cases also. And again, the keyword analysis that I touched on before. This is where the first pass at mapping the keywords to pieces of the content in the navigation, the wireframing is performed. This all finishes up in a formalized requirements document and a formalized design document that is approved. And so once it's approved, then we can start executing the task at hand. According to the project plan, again, some people are helping out on this from the customer's perspective. Sometimes there's specific vendors brought into it.
So this is sort of a next project phase is kind of a grab bag, infrastructure, features, and content, so that we could accommodate both Dennis's methodology and my process. For the small to medium-sized market, one of the things you have to do is worry about the site infrastructure, hosting infrastructure, et cetera. Again, these are some of my numbers that I use for estimating. Your mileage may vary, and the important thing is to sort of track how long it takes you to do these things. Set up the hosting. Maybe it's already provided. Maybe you just need to get the email with the access and you're good to go, or maybe you have to go in there and you discover that the client's piece of crap hosting provider doesn't have the latest version of PHP that you need. You got to go back and forth via email and ask for upgrades and get PHP modules installed, things like that. Joomla installation and primary configuration between 2 and 6 hours, getting Joomla installed, getting the global configuration elements set, getting some of the basic permissions set up and things like that, making sure everything works as it should. And then Joomla structural configuration. Again, this could be, nearly no time for an extremely simple site with a couple of pages, or if you have, a couple dozen pages, you may need to go in and create article categories and different subcategories, both for Joomla articles, but also for other components too. Maybe they want to do a staff list or a directory or something like that, and you've got to go into the contacts component and do some work there. Oh, I got it. Great, thanks. Then, of course, there's the templating process, and I have worked with template frameworks for Joomla in the past, but most of the time I do completely custom designs and completely bespoke templates. I have developed my own rough template framework that I use to crank these things out, but it's distinct from like an actual Joomla template extension you install and then can customize from there. Given that, first thing that I do with my flat graphical template in Fireworks or Photoshop or whatever, slice and dice it, turn it into an HTML web page. Build the basic CSS, the HTML structures to contain it. Once that is performing properly and shows up as I want to in Internet Explorer 6, for example, then I'll take it and I'll turn it into a Joomla template, where I take my index or my test.html file, turn it into Joomla's index.php file inside the template element, add in HTML overrides, integrate the WYSIWYG editor styles, build in options for module Chrome, etc. And then there are also sometimes there are specific templating tweaks that you need to make for specific types of components. So if a big part of the site is an e-commerce area, you might have a lot of work to do just designing HTML template overrides to get that component to output like you want it to. And then, I keep forgetting I've got it. Okay, and then there's features, and I guess it's kind of a generic term that I'm using to describe the components or specific functionality on the website. This could include both front-end things like an e-commerce portal or a message board or adding comments to articles. And it can include back-end things as well, like things that can help the Joomla administrators manage their site, keep backup utilities, security administration utilities, etc. What I typically try to do if one of these small to medium-sized projects has a big component involved in it, like an e-commerce portal, is I'll almost break that down as its own separate project, and I'll figure out, okay, how many products need to go into this catalog, how many categories need to be in this e-commerce plugin that goes into Joomla, and try to break it down and estimate it per functional area. And then another thing you can really do to save a lot of time is a lot of Joomla implementers will have a set of must-have extensions which go in every single Joomla implementation you drop in. For example, a WYSIWYG editor. Almost everybody upgrades Joomla's default WYSIWYG editor to get something better. I've got I use JCE, I use the Akiba products, I've got a couple of other like Mavic thumbnails and Google Analytics, and a common package of third-party extensions which go into every Joomla website. Using Akiba Backup or similar utilities, you can kind of build your own base framework site, and then you can just spawn off different versions which have both the full installation of Joomla dropped into place, as well as all of those extensions pre-installed and pre-configured, so you can save some time there. Some metrics that I personally use for cranking out content when I've got to estimate, volume of work I've got to do. I figure, you can produce a web page in the content management system in about 15 minutes. That's assuming finalized content. Get it into the CMS, make it look pretty. Image production, here's my CD full of images. I needed to get these online. Well, you got to typically resize them, crop them, etc. Put them up online, 6 per hour. Some metrics that I use for copywriting and copy editing. Some of the creative estimates that I need to pull together. And then, component-specific production, it really is going to vary according to component. So why don't you take over, Dennis, on the enterprise level.
You just follow the plan. I mean, it's as simple as that. So you have a plan in place and you follow it. Some of the things following the plan that you do here is during the execution of the plan, the initial site is created, the extensions are configured, just like Justin indicated. Not going to go through all of these. One thing that is different is the teachers, teach the teachers, that's what T3 is. So you're not teaching necessarily the end users, you may teach the end user representatives, and they in turn would teach the end users. SEO implementation, the SEO meta tagging is done at this point in time. The review to make sure that the content has the proper keywords on the proper pages. If there are extensions to be developed, this is the place where they are developed. There's probably more what if extensions, custom extensions that don't exist in a larger project just because more people come up with more things that they can think of, more things that they need, different ways of doing it, just more people involved on a larger project, more things that need to be customized. The design is implemented, the developers implement the design. Again, it's the same as a smaller website, only there's more involved, more to do. And as those things come out of the prototype stage into the finalization stage, they're unit tested by either the developers or a smaller expanded team, and they're run through the target developers, and IE6 is usually not one of them, although the last corporation I had, IE6 was one of them.
Add like 30% to the price of certain project elements if they say.
And you lose a lot of hair over it, as you can see. As far as the next stage, this is where you finalize everything. So things are coming into this block with having been, reviewed, worked already. Now there's final tweaking. So one thing I do want to mention here is that there's usually 3 or possibly 4 environments. There's one for development, and there's 3 for the end user. One they do their own training in, so they can break things and not have to worry about it. And then there's the live production, and there's that staging area where if you put something into production, you usually use it after you go live. This is where you test it out before you put it into the live environment. This is at the end, getting where the end users actually have to get involved in, editing the content that they've gotten approved. Some final content is coming in at this point in stage. So the end users are getting they're involved in it. They go through the training and they finalize the content. Usually there are different versions of the content since there's usually a large group. So you may want to put version control or extensions to allow you to version control your articles, and I found that to be very helpful.
Dennis, I had a question in terms of syncing up all those different servers. Like, is that done regularly, or is it just kind of?
No, it's everybody holds their breath, and okay, we're going to do it here, and then so it's a coordinated effort.
Oh, okay.
So you're either working in one or the other.
Not all at the same time.
Not all at the same time.
Okay. Next, we wanted to touch on testing and quality assurance and launch. For a small website, quality assurance is basically ideally 0 hours. Your development environment is going to turn into your production environment in all likelihood. Your client should have been looking at the site and logging in and checking things out at this time. And so ideally, any issues will have been resolved and nipped in the bud, and so there really isn't a whole lot to do. And most testing will focus on big, obvious problems, so at this point, the site should hopefully slide right out of there without any major issues. A little bit different for the enterprise.
For the enterprise, so there's a bunch of hands in the mix, and all of a sudden, hands start coming down, and you say, don't raise it again. We're going live with it. It's been approved. Don't touch it. So all changes are frozen, and then there's a group of folks from both perspectives, the client and the developer, where they do formal testing, user testing, acceptance testing is obtained. Everybody says, yes, I like what I see, but can I add one more thing? And you have to say no. I mean, it's as simple as that. Sometimes you run it up, the organizational chain. And so that's what this is all about, the acceptance testing and the go live.
Yeah, in small, medium market, the follow-up and support elements are also very different than the enterprise approach. I've developed a standard base of documentation, that I'll change slightly for each client. But basically, I've got a couple of PDF files that I hand off. One is usually for site administrators, and then one is just for site users, how to update articles, do simpler things. Even if I train and have this awesome documentation for the clients, so much of the time they won't do it. They won't do it. It's because in these small businesses, updating the website is often someone's extra job. Oh, all right, we need you to manage the restaurant and, stay here until 2 a.m. and make sure everything's good. And you're going to update the website too. Yeah, right. No, that manager's going to go home and go to bed. So a lot of times they just won't do it, and I find that they are coming back to me to say, hey, Justin, can you do this simple content update? Even though I've trained them in how to do it, even though I've given them a kick-ass content management system, even though it should be really easy for them to do, they still won't do it. So I tend to roll that into ongoing services that I provide to them. And that's a real common situation, as well as ongoing technical services. Joomla needs to be updated regularly. The extensions need to be updated regularly. And I sell that to them. I say, I want to continue to work with you on an ongoing basis, and this is a real great opportunity for some recurring revenue.
In the enterprise, this is again after go live, so you're monitoring your website, make sure it's happy, make sure your clients are happy, everybody's happy. You'll optimize it for your marketing team. This is where some of that work may begin. Provide warranty support, hand-holding some of the things that maybe didn't make it at cutoff time, at launch time, are now put in. And you prepare for the next phase or the next project. I'm not really going to talk too much of this. This is the marketing piece of it, link building, maintenance support, enhancements as they're requested. And that brings us to our tips for...
Yes. We had some tips we wanted to share. Top of the list in my book is managing client expectations accordingly. And Dennis, why don't you talk to the communication aspect of this?
That's top of my list. I mean, I call it communications. So with the project plan, with the department's document, if it's not written down, we're not doing it. If it is written down, let's see who is doing it. So they know when it's supposed to be done, who's supposed to do it, and if it's late, why, and they know who to ask.
A lot of times, too, I find that in terms of communicating with clients, and especially if they're a little bit more of a difficult client or wants a lot of attention, I always throw them a bone, like regularly. Like every day something goes into their email box that they need to ideally see, or maybe every couple days, but it keeps them occupied and it keeps them engaged instead of me needing to be reactionary to the things that they're doing, that they ask, well, where the hell's the design comp? And I say, I sent you an email about that 3 days ago. And problem's fine. So, yeah.
We sort of automate that.
Okay.
They throw us phones usually. I mean,
Sure.
like, I would like to have this done. Like, can you do it this afternoon? Because I want to show it to my boss. Final approval is going to happen tomorrow. So we use Basecamp for that, and we have a to-do list, and we let our clients log into Basecamp, and they give us stuff to do. We give them stuff to do, and that interaction, it's all documented. We've been successful with that.
We talked about specifying all deliverables and client responsibilities in the contract. I'm sure that the corporate contracts have that stuff totally locked down, or your lawyers are good. Be anal about controlling scope. As soon as a client opens their pie hole and says, "Well, could you also just throw in?" You got to say, "Oh, well, you never want to say no. You want to say yes, but that's going to cost you more money." And of course, because they signed the contract and you've been communicating with them and they know what the scope is, they should be happy to pay you for that extra work. And they're going to understand that it's extra work that they're asking you to do.
And usually the way I handle that is I say, well, I don't know if that's in our project plan. Let me see.
Yes, exactly. Or the taxonomy document. In my case, and you go back and you signed off on this thing, and we'll need a little more money for that. And if the communication is there, they will be happy to pay you more money. They'll be expecting it. And then assert yourself as the expert. Especially with small businesses, sometimes you come across the guys like, "I've got this brilliant idea. All I need is a programmer. I'm going to build the next Groupon." No, Groupon's already there, and then there's already Living Social and other stuff. And you need to, especially with the small to medium-sized markets where they don't have a lot of sophistication. A lot of times I go in and say, "Listen, I've done this. I've been doing this for years and years and years. And I know what works. And I see that you don't have an email newsletter, and I know that's one of the most effective way for your business to communicate with your customers. And a lot of times it's the slowest hanging fruit, but you got to say, you hired me for a reason, and that's to come in and help you make this successful. I am the expert. I'm happy to listen to your concerns, but I'm still going to tell you if I think what you're doing is a bad idea. If you pay me to do it, I'll still do it, but I will tell you if I think it's not going to be effective for you."
And a lot of the things in this area for me are
It's cheaper to listen to you.
Yes.
are in the social marketing. Facebook, a lot of the corporations are just getting their feet wet in it. So this is the time to maybe have that next conversation about the next phase.
Yeah.
Speaking of time, I think we're out of time, but do we have time for questions?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yes.
A question for Justin and maybe Dennis.
Sure.
During the keyword stage, do you, as a little owner, help in that process? Do you help generate keywords? Do you make the content providers do that?
Usually I will go, in a small to medium-sized environment, I'll go to the business owner and I'll say, "Why don't you give me a list of phrases that you would like to try to show up on Google, ideally." And it's going to be some pretty simple stuff. And I also say, let's put your name and the name of the city in the meta tags, because then I know that'll give them a good search result. Say, "Hey, look, it worked." Usually I will not do, or they don't have the budget for the very granular search engine optimization. So I'll just ask for a site-wide list of keywords and a site-wide meta description, which I then put in global configuration. And I tell them, if you want to go try to optimize stuff, you can. Or if you've got more budget for it, you can hire me to do search engine marketing or search engine optimization on a more granular level. But I try to keep it real simple for them. And usually I just tell them, email me a list of phrases, and then I help them tweak it a little bit before it gets applied to the whole site.
For me, it's usually similar as far as the phrases, but they're mapped. So if there's an existing website, I'll start with that, and then we'll have that conversation as a starting point. I ask them for about 12, areas that they want to highlight. So 12 pages as a rule of thumb. 6 to 18, somewhere in that area, as far as long tail keywords where they should be and where they should be placed.
Sure. All right. Oh yeah.
During the 1 to 2 month small engagements you have, roughly how many times would you meet with the client face to face?
Sometimes you just have one meeting. I totally have gigs where the client just wants to make sure I'm not some complete hippie freak, and I actually am, but I got a haircut. And then it's all telephone. I've had a number of clients, small clients like that, where they just want to meet you face to face once, and then it's good to go. They trust you, and the communication is there by email and phone. It depends. Larger money engagements typically require more meetings and more people involved, but sometimes it's just meet once, knock it out. Yes.
I just had a question about the proposal process, because a lot of times it's difficult to anticipate what's going to come up. And I find myself kind of getting into the architecture of the site, looking at what extensions are going to be used, what sort of features, and then you've already invested all this time up front by the time you're writing the proposal.
I have the benefit of working from a bunch of past proposals that use like one site. I've already written up a description for what the e-commerce component's going to be, so I can kind of copy and paste it. That's why my numbers are pretty low for developing these proposals. I also always try to be the one that brings the contract. I write the contract for the client so that it's in my bailiwick, it's under my control. Also all the legalese as well. And then, it's in that list of deliverables. And if it's like a specific type of feature that's not, part of Joomla's core, then I'll really spell that out. And one of the deliverables will be like e-commerce capability powered by the following extension to include, up to 12 products, etc., and try to really put some scope on it. And then you kind of work backwards and break down the costs.
Do you have issues with small clients understanding intellectual property and who owns what?
Every once in a while. I had this hair salon owner who wanted to rip off some entire hip-hop song and put it on their homepage. And I was like, well, you can only use 30 seconds of that. It's pretty rare that everybody's aware that it's stealing at this point, especially with the RIAA and other intellectual property cabal members. Okay, well there you go.
I'm a photographer. I nail people on, for instance.
What's that?
I'm a photographer. I've nailed people on.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, and you should. If you're a creator and you generate your content, then there's all. Most of my, I've never really had a situation where a client will insist on it, and I will never do that. I will tell them, you're breaking the law, or I'm not going to be part of that.
What about in terms of what's yours, what's theirs?
Usually this is in the legalese of my contract, and although I try to avoid putting in the phrase work for hire in my contract, although I have had some clients demand that, and we worked it out so it was included. But basically I say that any original content that I create for the purposes of the project will become their intellectual property, and they will have a license to use it. And I've got a couple of clauses in my standard contract that speak to that. So they own it outright. There's no licensing or anything like that. Although I've started to think about some things in that direction.
Just going back to what somebody said about the extensions. One of the downsides of thinking about the extension you're going to use when you're going into a proposal is what happens when you can't use it, when it doesn't meet the client's needs. So with what I've done is to generalize it more, is to come up with, we're going to use an e-commerce extension,
right,
but not specify a specific one in the proposal. Then you have the option of, if product A doesn't have this and won't have it by the time your project's done, but product B comes out with it in the meantime and it wasn't there before, you can switch without having invested so much work into this one. You can get over there and still be able to do it without having to go back and renegotiate the contract and do this and do that. It actually helps a little bit to keep a broader sense than going down to a specific one when you're doing the proposal.
Yeah, that's happened to me too, and in that case I just described the functions. This feature will include the following functions. I can buy a product online. It's integrated with a payment gateway, things like that. Dennis, did you have any thoughts on these questions?
No thoughts whatsoever. No, I really can't add much to the conversation. These types of things, it doesn't make a difference if it's a larger project.
The client usually doesn't care anyway. Maybe they have heard of a specific product, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to use it.
Right. They just want it to work at the end of the day. Okay, so I think that wraps up our... Oh, one more.
One question. Do you have any projects where you find that it's hard to actually develop a really strong scope until you actually get the project?
Oh, man. 3 words: time and materials.
Right.
If that's the situation and you don't know what you're going to get into, You go to the client and say, this is going to have to be billed hourly just because we don't know what's going on. Or sometimes, we talked about this with discovery as well, sometimes you can charge for it. You can say, all right, the first thing we're going to do for you is we're going to come in and look at this giant mess, and I think it's going to take between 5 and 15 hours of my time, and the outcome of that will be this, and then we can build the website. In the case of a lot of small businesses, you don't need it, and it's a lot less complex anyway, so it's not as much of an issue.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's hand it off to Danny. Thanks, everybody.